Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today I'm going to be showing you how to wire up a low pressure fuel pump to your Motiv Reflex controller. And I know a lot of you guys have asked me about this because I posted a DIY on my Fuel It low pressure fuel pump a while ago, but you might have a pump from Precision Raceworks or Vader Solutions or one of the many fuel pump suppliers out there, and they all have their own wiring harness and installation instructions that can make it a little bit confusing. But in reality, all of them work virtually the same, and it's actually really simple when you understand how everything works. So in this video, I'm going to try to, basically make everything nice and clear and easy to understand so you can make sure that you're wiring up your low pressure fuel pump properly. We'll go ahead and wire up the low pressure fuel pump on my 340i, and I'll show you some troubleshooting steps that you can do to make sure that everything will work when it's supposed to, so you don't run into issues when you try to run logs. So hopefully you guys find this video useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. So like I said, I have a Fuel It low pressure fuel pump, and it comes with this wiring harness. So a bunch of wires and fuses and things like that makes it seem really complicated. But in reality, the main thing that we need is this bad boy right here. So let's go ahead and take it out of the package so we can see what we got. So this is kind of the secondary brains of the operation. Obviously the Motiv Reflex does a lot of the work, but this is what actually controls sending power to your low pressure fuel pump. And this is a relay. Now, the reason why you need this is because all of the fuel pumps you guys should be using will have a secondary pump attached onto the stock fuel pump. I don't really recommend the drop-in, plug-and-play fuel pumps because a lot of them have issues. So most of the pumps that I recommend come with a secondary pump attached onto the stock basket. Mine comes with an additional 450 liter power pump. Some of them come with 525 liter power pumps. So there are a lot of different options there depending on your horsepower goals, but they all virtually work the same. The secondary pump that we're activating is either on or off. So if you try to just power that up and wire it up to your battery or something that turns on with your car, it's going to constantly be running at maximum capacity, and that'll cause it to burn out. So you really need something that can automatically activate the fuel pump when you need it. Your stock fuel pump will work for regular driving, starting the car, cruising, but when you get into high boost, you want that trigger to basically turn on the switch and make that fuel pump activate. And that's where this relay comes into play. So we're going to talk about this really quick. Again, if you have a different fuel pump that's not Fuel It, it might look a little different than this. A lot of this might be covered up. A lot of people try to make it plug and play and stuff, but the actual way that it works is all the same. This is just a universal part. This isn't specific to BMWs or fuel pumps or anything like that. This is something you can get on AutoZone or anywhere, but it should come with your kit. And let's go ahead and talk about how it works. So this is the diagram that I like to reference when I'm explaining to people how to wire up your relay. Again, if it has a bunch of connectors and stuff at each of these ends of the wires, I don't really recommend using those. A lot of them you're going to have to cut off to wire it up properly, but just pay attention to how this works before you cut everything so you know what you need to do. So instead of looking at wire colors, we're going to just look at the pin numbers. The same way you wired up your Motiv Reflex is the same way that you want to pay attention to how this relay works. Each of the numbers corresponds to a specific function on the relay. So 30 is a wire that's going to be going directly to your battery. This should always have power, and this makes sure that the relay itself sees 12 volts. Now, it is recommended to run a fuse in line with that wire. So you can see on here, it already comes with a built-in fuse. If I can take this off. So you can see it already comes with a fuse holder basically on this wire. So this is 30, but this is going to make sure that if there was a surge in power, some issue, then the fuse would trip and it would prevent us from, causing a fire or having any other issues with our electrical system. Now, moving down the line, you have 85, and 85 is your ground. So this can be grounded anywhere. And now you can see you've basically got power to the relay and ground so that the relay itself has power. Now, the third one, 86, is going to be your switched power. In this diagram, it's using a manual switch, which you can use, if you want a manual switch in your car to turn it on and say, okay, this is a time where I want the fuel pump to work, that will work. In our case, what I recommend is wiring it up to switched power on your fuse box. So that way your relay will only have power when you actually turn the car on. Now, some people also just wire this up directly to the battery as well. That's fine, but just keep in mind you're taking away a layer of safety because now the relay will always have power from the battery versus only getting full power when the car is turned on. So that's why I like to do it that way. Now, the last trigger is 87, and that, of course, goes to your accessory. So in this diagram, it's going to a light bulb, but in our case, it's going to be going to the positive terminal on that secondary fuel pump. And then that, of course, still needs to be grounded separately as well. Now, the only real big difference here that I think a lot of people get confused by is wiring it up to your Reflex, which obviously that diagram didn't show specifically. So most people assume that switched power is what you want to wire up to your Reflex. And it's actually not the case. What the Reflex does is it completes the circuit by completing your ground. So that 85 is what you're actually going to connect to your Motiv Reflex. And if you look at the Motiv Reflex instructions, it actually explains it pretty simply. It shows you that the ground coming from 85 should be wired either to aux out 1 or aux out 2, depending on what your tuner recommends. So that's how you're going to want to wire it up. And what that's going to do is it's going to complete the ground on the relay when you want to turn on your low pressure fuel pump. So that's probably the trickiest part. One, of course, is the relay, because a lot of people, again, try to make this plug and play and put a bunch of connectors and stuff on here, especially if they're setting it up for a Hobbs switch. A Hobbs switch does the same thing. You plug it into your intake manifold or your charge pipe, and when it sees pressure, it completes the circuit. But it's not a very intelligent way to control your low pressure fuel pump. And so that's why I recommend just using a Motiv Reflex, so we have all the other safeties that can compensate for boost, ethanol content, everything that a Motiv Reflex can read. It can use that to control your low pressure fuel pump output and make sure that all the safeties are in place. So if you have an issue, it'll put your car into limp mode and protect your engine. But yeah, again, this is a universal part. This relay works in any car for any accessory that you want to activate on a switch. If you want to know which wire goes to which number, usually all you need to do is unplug this, and you can actually see down here, it has numbers printed in the plastic to tell you which connector goes to which number. And that way, when you plug it back in, you can follow those wires and send it to your Reflex or your power, or your ground, or whatever you need to do. So hopefully that simplifies things. I know it can be a little more confusing when you're reading instructions from certain places, but again, this works for every single low pressure fuel pump on the market. So let's go ahead and finish wiring up my car. So the first thing that we're going to do is hook up the power and the ground that's going onto our low pressure fuel pump. You should have 2 posts. So this post right here and this post right here, these are added onto the top hat on your stock pump so that you can connect to the secondary pump that's inside of your tank. So this one you can see is marked with a minus, so that's going to be our ground, and this one is going to be our power. So that's going to be pretty simple. Just unscrew the nuts from each of the posts. Go ahead and attach the red and black wire that should have come with your low pressure fuel pump. If not, you can just grab wire from a local store and get some ring terminals to attach it, and then tighten down those 2 nuts so that way they are properly secured. And what we're going to do here is just poke a hole through this grommet so that way we can run these wires through. So I'm going to use this pick tool to just stab through that. And then we'll switch to a slightly bigger screwdriver. So make that a little more aggressive. And then finally switch to this knife just because we might want, a little more motivation. We can do it this way though, just to make sure we can get the wires through. And just pull the wire through. There we go. All right, and unfortunately, of course, it started raining, so We won't get a chance to actually run some logs tonight, but we can go ahead and finish up the good stuff here for the final wiring, and I'll show you how you can test to make sure it's all working. So we've got the positive and negative cable ran back here from the low pressure fuel pump, and we've got our relay. So again, you can pull this off, look in here and see all of the numbers on each of the connectors. So that'll tell you where 30 is, where 87 is, all of that good stuff. So we're just gonna follow the diagram that we saw before to wire this up to our low pressure fuel pump. And you can see this only goes on one way because some of the connectors are rotated at different angles, so you can't really put it on wrong. There's only one way to actually plug it in. All right, so let's start with 30. Since we know what that is, that's gonna be this power wire, and we're gonna wire that up to the positive terminal. There's this little extra piece back here that you can connect it onto this little nut. So that's what we're going to do. And then we'll connect this on top of here. And then put this nut back on. And don't forget to install the fuse if you have a kit like mine that comes with it already. The fuse wasn't in here, so if you don't put the fuse in, it's not going to complete the circuit and it won't work. But when you get it, it just looks like this. So it can be kind of hard to forget. You need to install a fuse in here for it to work, so don't forget that. Now next is 85, and that's going to be this connector. This is my ground, but like we talked about, this is actually going to go to the Motiv Reflex, so we'll ignore that for now. On the other side is 86, and this is going to go to switched power. I've got a fuse tap that we can put into the fuse box, and I've already identified a fuse in the fuse box that's switched, so use a multimeter to test for that, and basically remove that fuse, put the fuse that you removed in this bottom connection, and then this just plugs into the fuse box. So that way you'll get power when the car is on and no power when the car is off. So we're going to use this one. Push them both in there. Really good. And then push that in. Now you will obviously need a wire to reach it. This comes with a very long wire, and so I'm going to use some of this to reach that. If you don't have a kit that comes with extra wire, just again go to your hardware store, get some 14 gauge or something wire, and it should work just fine. Now again, I know these are supposed to be like connectors or whatever to help make it a little more plug and play, but I don't like them, so I'm going to cut them off and just basically crimp the wires together. Put some tape on, and then I'm going to run this underneath this panel. And plug that back in. And then the last one is 87. So this one goes to the positive wire coming off of our low pressure fuel pump. Now we've only got two more wires to connect. One is 85, which is going to go to our Motiv Reflex. And then the other one is the ground wire coming off of our low pressure fuel pump. This one you can ground anywhere in the car. I'm going to ground it on a bracket that's in here. I know that one works because that's the same bracket that I used on my 440i. And then, yeah, we're going to ground that on a post. Basically, any location that you find that will give you a good ground, go for it. And then, of course, we've got still our black wire that's going to go to the Motiv Reflex. So again, cut her off, get some wire. And then I'm just gonna run this wire all the way to the front of the car, and we'll finish this in the engine bay. And now we have pulled the wire all the way up through the engine bay, and we're ready to test it out. So the easiest way to do this is put the car in accessory mode. We basically just hit the start stop button once, and then we've got our trigger wire, and we've got multiple locations where we can ground it. Like we've got a ground post down here. You can touch it off on the nuts on your strut tower, but basically just touch it and see if you hear the fuel pump turn on. So here we're not hearing the fuel pump. You might hear the actual clicking of the relay. So the relay is turning on, but the fuel pump itself is not turning on. So that likely means either the power wire going to the fuel pump isn't good. Maybe if there's a fuse in line with it, the fuse isn't connected, it's blown or something. Or the low pressure fuel pump ground is bad. So double check the ground wire going from your fuel pump to your ground location and make sure that it's getting a good ground. Now, if you're not hearing the relay at all, then you need to double check your wiring again, make sure that you've got all the numbers on the connectors connected to the right thing. Again, double check your fuses and things like that. But in this case, I know it's a bad ground because I didn't ground the low pressure fuel pump. So you can hear that click. It basically just sounds like a light switch flicking on and off. So we'll go fix that ground and then check it again. So now we fix the ground and let's try it again. So it should be very obvious that the fuel pump is working. It's much louder than just the relay itself. So that tells us that we are all good to go. So the last thing you need to do is just connect it to the Motiv Reflex. Let's go ahead and turn off the car. Now with the Reflex, there are a couple different ways that you can do this. If you look at the wires, you're either looking for this white, kind of light gray wire, or this medium gray wire. So these are your two output wires from the Motiv Reflex. Since I have the plug and play kit, they have these connectors on them and they actually labeled them. So this is auxiliary output 1 and this is auxiliary output 2. But what we're going to do, because again, you know, the plug and play nature can kind of make things a little more difficult, we're going to go ahead and cut this off and just connect the wire that we got from our fuel pump to the actual wire coming out of the Reflex. So just double check with your tuner whether they want you to use output 1 or output 2. Connect it directly to that wire that they recommend, and then they'll be able to activate it inside of your tune. But yeah, it's really that simple. At that point, you can go ahead, run some logs, make sure your fuel pressure is holding, make sure everything looks like it's working as it should. Again, your tuner might have to make adjustments for the boost trigger and when it activates to make sure that it keeps up with your fuel system, but otherwise you should be good to go. So hopefully this video helps you guys out that are trying to understand how to wire this up to your Motiv Reflex. If there are any other accessories or things you want me to make a DIY on like this, just let me know. But yeah, I think that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.